And finally, I want to bring up Ruby Al-Qasim, your current PhD student in creative writing, who will give us a proper introduction. So here she is.
Thank you, Corey. Corey's taller than I am. How about now? Good. Goodish? Okay. Thanks, Corey, and good evening to you all. It's really great to see everybody. Lots of familiar faces, which is nice. Is that loud enough? Still? Okay. In Lucas Mann's Captive Audience, he writes, quote, "Lately, I can't stand a narrator who isn't confessing to something. I think that if it doesn't feel, even just for a moment, like a secret joy or burden to unload, then why say it? So I'll start with a confession. I spent the summer reading nearly 80 books in preparation for my doctoral exams in early August. You're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to be responsible and read them over the 2 semesters prior to the exams, not the 2 months prior. One of the books that I reread was Lucas Mann's Lord Fear, a book about Mann's grasping search for the identity and humanity of his brother Josh, who died of heroin overdose when Mann was just 13. The book is comprised of fragments mirroring the work of the search and research he's conducted. Pieces of memory are wedged between interviews with his brother's friends and family, realizations interrupt scenes, and suppositions and questions inhabit the same amount of space, if not more, than the bare facts of his brother's life and death. When you have young children and you need to read 80 books in a couple months' time, the smart thing to do is skip over the ones you've already read. I'd first encountered Lord Fear in Dr. Jill Talbot's class 3 years ago, in the first semester of my PhD. But I couldn't skip this book. I had to read it again. It's a gorgeous piece of writing, haunting in its deft use of elision, captivating in its often futile probing into the past. The more Mann searches for some truths about his brother, the more a cohesive truth of any kind eludes him. The more people he interviews, the more nuanced and therefore impossible to define his brother becomes. And perhaps most striking, the more he digs, the more he sacrifices his own memories and portrait of who his brother was. Remarking on one interview he's just conducted in the memoir, he writes, quote, "But I already asked Philip what he thought he knew, and now, even as I don't want them to be, his memories are mine. At least a little bit they are." As his memories become discolored by the recollections of everyone he interviews, he loses Josh again, in a way. And this time, we are present, and we grieve along with him. For me, experiencing Lucas Mann's work is about experiencing the layers that strangers, or even our closest loved ones, don't often reveal. Quote, "The greatest intimacy I can think of is allowing oneself to be seen," Mann writes in his latest book, Captive Audience. He's writing about reality TV, and he's writing about his marriage, about the yearning to be seen and seen anew by the ones who see us every day, whether they be spouses or viewing audiences. But he's also writing about himself as a writer, about the dubious power essayists wield, their tricky claim to truth, their use of artistry to conceal or interrogate secret desires. Mann's books demand a second read from me, and let's be honest, many rereads well into the future, because he's a scholar of his genre in the truest sense. He layers his own observations and inquiries with discussions of other writers, like Susan Sontag, James Baldwin, David Foster Wallace, and Leslie Jamison. He pairs the philosophies of Roland Barthes with analysis of Nene Leakes of Real Housewives fame, and then questions whether doing so has value. Never content to write simple pop cultural commentary or narrative recollection, Mann is constantly scrutinizing the confines of creative nonfiction. Captive Audience is as much about persona performance as it is about the Kardashians, the Survivors, Honey Boo Boo. It's as much about the performance that Mann engages in when he casts himself as the narrator of his narrative, about the performance he engages in as he sits next to his wife on the couch in a darkened living room, watching reality TV together, seeing together, being seen or wanting to be seen by the other. His introspection is unflinching, and I am made voyeur, enthralled by his intimacy as much as by his brilliance. He couples this intelligence and sincerity with an ever-present empathy, which he offers every person-made character populating his pages. As writers go, he's excellent company. Lucas Mann's books include both Lord Fear and Captive Audience, as well as his first book, Class A, in which he details his year-long immersion in the minor league baseball scene of the Clinton, Iowa Lumber Kings. About this book, Adam Langer wrote in the Boston Globe in 2013, quote, "If there's one surefire big league prospect among the has-beens, might-be's, and never-will-be's who populate this memoir, it's Mann himself, who, in his first trip to the plate, knocks it out of the park." He continues, "I'd be willing to wager that Lucas Mann is one of the names that will endure." Langer was correct, though it was a pretty safe bet. Born in New York City, Mann received his MFA from the University of Iowa, where he was the provost's visiting writer in nonfiction. His essays have appeared in Barrel House, Tri-Quarterly, the Kenyon Review, Slate, Guernica, and others. He's the recipient of numerous fellowships, including from the National Endowment of the Arts and the United States Artists Foundation. He teaches creative writing at the University of Massachusetts Dartmouth and currently lives in Rhode Island. If you would, please join me in offering a very warm welcome tonight to Lucas Mann.
Oh, no. Yeah? Okay. Thank you all so much for being here. And thank you, Ruby. That was lovely. It was it's nice to have really thoughtful, nice things said about you. This is the first time I've ever been in Texas. This has been such a warm welcome. Everybody has been so great, and the questions that I got earlier were fantastic. I'm really enjoying it. My instinct often at readings is to read way under and then get out. And I've been told to try to not do that. And I'm sorry if that is a disappointment to some of you. So I'm going to try to read from a couple of things, which I think could be cool. So Captive Audience is the book that came out most recently. I'm going to read from that, and then I'm going to shift gears a little and read from Lord Fear. And actually, I first met Jill Talbot, who I'm sure some of your professors, at an event in San Francisco, and that was the first time I'd ever read from two books at the same time, and it was very cool then. So I'm going to try it out one more time. Okay, Ruby did a much better job of describing my writing than I can, but just a little thing. So this is from Captive Audience, which is about reality TV and love and intimacy and all of these things, and it kind of mixes more memoiristic stuff with more journalistic stuff, and then more cultural criticism, which is, in my version of cultural criticism, it's just really intensely detailed descriptions of things that I have seen on reality TV. And so I'm going to try to read a little bit from the middle that kind of does all of those things, hopefully in some way. I've been talking about this one person that I interviewed, and then also a little bit about Rob Kardashian, who I imagine some people are familiar with, who has since kind of become a villain in a lot of ways, and I just want to say that I recognize his villainy, but that this was written before that and does not address it. And please don't hold that against me. Okay. There's two. This is confusing. There's two Roberts in this section. The first Robert is not Robert Kardashian. Okay. Robert Galinsky makes characters for a living. People come to him as themselves, leave as something a little more. Galinsky invented and still runs the New York City Reality Television School, the first and only of its kind, preparing hopefuls for their cattle calls like a Lee Strasberg reconceived for 21st century ambitions. When I meet him, he's guarded. The only press coverage he's ever gotten has been brutal. But after I tell him sincerely that I find his critics to be pearl clutchers, he becomes animated and jumps right into telling me about one of his best students. There was this girl I had come in, he tells me. She walked with a cane and she had a service dog. I asked her, "Who are you?" She said, "I'm the girl who has a prescription pill addiction because I'm mentally ill." She asked me if that was okay, and I asked her if she was okay with it. And she said, "Oh yeah, it's true, that's what I'm bringing to the table." And so we went with that. Galinsky finishes this anecdote with a proud shrug and leans back into a leather couch. We're in a coffee shop in Alphabet City that seems to serve as his home base. He comes out of experimental theater and improv, speaks in those terms, wears jeans with flip-flops and red sunglasses that are a bit of a personal trademark. The barista kids know he always orders a macchiato. For a long time, he was just an improv coach. He started teaching reality when an Argentinian dog groomer called the number on his website and said he had a month to prepare for an audition for a show that would end up being called Groomer Has It. Galinsky lets that name hang out there like I'll recognize it. Remarkably, I don't, but no matter. If I'd seen the show, I would have seen Jorge become the star. Out of all the groomers, it was Jorge whom everybody wished good things for. He played the whole damn season from hero position, just like an improv game, the way Galinsky taught him to, and he killed it. He didn't win the show, but he won affection. He proved to be watchable, and after his season, he landed a role on TLC's Extreme Poodles. He was never the guy who threw the glass at the wall, Galinsky tells me. He was the guy who went up to the glass thrower and said, "Don't do that. Why'd you have to do that? What are you feeling that made you do that?" Galinsky figured out pretty fast that the same principles he'd always taught improvers applied to reality shows. That willingness to constantly stoke the story forward, that in-the-moment fearlessness, sustained commitment above all else. A common misconception among people who deride reality performers, he tells me, is that nobody's interested in the ones who don't get into fights, that they don't provide intrigue. The truth is, and any seasoned on-the-fly performer knows this, if you jump into the middle of the fight to break it up, you become a hero. Or you become someone trying to be a hero, and as long as it seems genuine, everyone wants to see someone try to be that. I agree with this, and then we both try to come up with that F. Scott Fitzgerald quote about heroes, but we can't quite remember, so we go back to TV and what makes for a great performance of self. We speak of Rodney King breaking down on Celebrity Rehab, Galinsky's favorite of the shows, and the guy from Taxi, and the drummer from that one grunge band. They were so fucked up, these men. They were so pained, and they had been pained for so long, telling the story of their pain like every day of their lives had been an audition for the moment they could finally be that pained for an audience. I don't know if you should exactly call it talent, Galinsky says, but yeah, it always helps if they've got some really fucked up lived material to draw upon. That's a scab that he can pick at, help turn into the blood that an audience tunes in for. We're back to his pill-addicted, cane-using pupil. I asked Galinsky why she wanted that to be who she was on a television show. And did it work? Galinsky can't remember, but he's pretty sure that she hasn't made it on to whatever show it was that she wanted to get on. Doesn't matter. Those producers must be insane, he says. And the important thing anyway is that she went into her audition clear-eyed and armored. She would be an active storyteller. She would be the one valuing her trauma, valuing it enough to lead with it, as opposed to letting some producer ferret it out and then define her with it. I ask Galinsky if he's proud of that anecdote. It's a leading question and gets the expected answer. He helped, in his own way and in his own view, to give this woman some combination of the three qualities any teacher wants to provide to their students: authenticity, confidence, power. He tells me he teaches 2 classes at Rikers Island, and he tries to provide the soon-to-be paroled with the same qualities as the soon-to-be on TV. We sit silent for a moment, and I consider the 2 neat, though flawed, parallels he set up. Reality performer as prisoner, reality show as the world, which makes him some combination of shrink, parole officer, and career counselor. This all smacks of new agey self-empowerment in a way that would ordinarily make me uncomfortable. It still does a little, as we sit in the kind of coffee shop that guys like us always sit in, drinking our macchiatos and sneering about shows like CSI because they have no life, no guts to them. Guts, we agree, come from people like Galinsky's pill-addicted, cane-using student. He prodded her to reveal to a circle of fellow wannabe stars in class the tagline that she would put on her life, and regardless of its manufacturedness, it worked because it was nakedly pained, because it made you worry for her or tisk at her. And this exercise prepared her to repeat that story in an audition, to repeat that story as the official one, recorded, hopefully broadcast and commodified. If she wanted to be that brave, Galinsky says, and he leans forward on brave like he really means it. If she wanted to be that brave, then good. She was ready to tell her story. Brave is a tough word to accept, I think, and bravery a tough concept. The lines between bravery and arrogance or ignorance or stupidity or worse, desperation, sometimes it's hard to trust that those lines are there. But what else to call such an act? To put a name on yourself that marks you a freak or an asshole or a reclamation project, and then to step in front of a blinking red light, open source material for producers to do with what they will. Maybe I'm using bravery to describe what is really the internal calculation of how much attention one wants or sometimes believes that they need, and how much one is willing to risk to be seen. But I want to be seen, to be known somehow. I dream of that, and I've never risked anything like that. And so the act of risk makes this woman at least a little extra deserving of whatever it is that she wants. And whatever she wants seems less important in the face of what she'll do in the service of the wanting. It's not the car wreck people are looking for, Galinsky says, and I'll admit that sounds a little rehearsed. It's that moment when the car wreck is inevitable and we're wondering if someone will survive. So the camera turns on, crash, and then... Ask me for a tragedy and I'll point you to Rob Kardashian. I can't imagine it's easy to be younger brother to Courtney, Kim, and Khloe, older brother to Kendall and Kylie, each one so forceful and beautiful and impervious to wilting. Even in the earlier days, the happy times, Rob always stayed at the edges of the scene, darting in as a gentle foil or affable peacemaker. He operated as a sort of cipher for vaguely appealing normalness, often doofy and jovial, occasionally pouty, typically vain, always incompetent but sincere. I say this not to take away from their talent or work or personalities, but there are no bodies in the world more elevated or important than the Kardashian bodies. For a decade, they've been omnipresent, simultaneously idolized and scrutinized, and constantly in flux. I'm not the first person to argue this, but to say that their success is superficial is a disservice. They elevate superficiality. They are so good at it, so committed, so fully and captivatingly bared, so productive. They make no effort to make it look easy. It can become exhausting to tune into. Not Rob. Rob is attrition and apathy. Rob is trapped in the way that most compelling characters are trapped, in the way that I often feel trapped. Rob changes in directions that he does not want to change, and all of it is seen. Let me just admit this right away. I like to Google Fat Rob Kardashian to look at the image results. You know this. I think you do it too. Oh, sorry, there's like an epistolary address. That's to my wife. So when I say you do this too, it's to my wife. Where am I? You know this. I think you do it too. There are many results. If you wanted to, and I think someone should, you could make a collage of these images that run around all the walls of a giant gallery space. Tens of thousands of images with no break in between, many of them almost the same but not quite. It would be as though he were never not viewed, like a flipbook of a life spent flaunting and hiding himself at the exact same time, his eyes always peering out from under a baseball cap to see who's looking, and it's hard to tell whether he's checking to see if he's safely alone or checking to make sure that someone still cares to watch. Many of the pictures come spliced next to his early shots, the ones where he's shirtless and celebrating something insignificant in a horizon pool, tattoos dotting his muscled side abs like gum splotches on a cobblestone street. And then there is narrative just in this juxtaposition, a tragedy because look, he used to be one way, and look, now he's another, and look, it's still happening, and we get to watch him face it. I love to watch him face it. I think Rob and I are the same age. That must have something to do with it. He has been on television as himself for the exact span of time that I have loved you, and I have so badly wanted you to see me as the narrow, nubile, carefree kind of beautiful that he used to be. He used to cavort in his shots. That's the best word for it. We used to watch him just sort of hang around the family mansion, 23 and still living at home, eating a banana or drinking a beer, winking at the camera in a way that read less obnoxiously cool, more endearingly incompetent. He always seemed a bit adrift, a bit bored, and I took comfort in seeing somebody enact this condition successfully, one that I felt but could never accurately convey. He seemed not performatively ecstatic, just happy enough, happy in a way that is unnoticeable unless someone is really watching, and of course we were always really watching, and there was pleasure in seeing him exist as the least remarkable person in the room. Now when we watch him, we see the way he tries to hide his enlarged self, see his family speak about him in whispers with cruel worry. We talk about how long ago it was that Rob cavorted, and it always feels at least a little bit profound to point out the way time passes, how ominous that can be. We were still living in Iowa the first time Rob broke down in a scene that had been clearly orchestrated for a breakdown. Family therapy held in what looked to be a vintage furniture showroom, complete with ornate velvet couches and fur blankets draped over mid-century chairs. Rob had on a black baseball cap, as would become the norm, presumably to hide the creeping baldness, and an oversized black hoodie to hide everything else. He grew increasingly upset at accusations flying his way. He began to tear up as the therapist coaxed him. "You look sad. Am I misreading you?" Then fled to the bathroom. His mother and two of his sisters, immaculate in dress and posture, stayed on the couch, stoic. Another sister and the therapist, and I would guess 2 or 3 cameras, followed him. The bathroom wasn't huge, so he was trapped, and the cameras were tight on him. The shot stayed mostly on him in profile, newly expanding torso heaving, the lightly stubbled beginnings of a double chin accordioning as he cried. He held a hand towel over his face, and there was that drama of watching someone so closely as they show you how little they want to be watched. "All I care about is like saying yes to my mom and making her happy," he said, trapped in there. He looked up. "And doing whatever my sisters want to make them happy. And when it comes to the easiest things, they won't help me." Here he buried his head back in the towel and squeaky cried. The therapist's bony hand was on his shoulder. She was kneading him, and her enormous pewter bracelet shone in the lighting. In an on-the-fly cutaway shot to his mother and sisters sitting without them, his mother, stone-faced, said, "I like it when he's vulnerable because I think he needs to break down those walls. He's so angry." Watching it, I was struck by how much she genuinely seemed to think that she was caring for him, and also how much she was consciously writing him into this sad, angry man boy, handing him over to the viewers as such. Of course, the next shot was back to Rob, trying to articulate that there are so many things that he wants to do, successes that he should have, that dress sock company that showed such promise, and if his father was alive, his father might understand a little better. The therapist brushed that away, called it a top-layer issue, told him that he had spent too much time running from his feelings, from his very self. "You're one of those steam kettles, Robert," she said. "You know, sitting on the stove on the fire. You're so full of feeling." Then on cue he boiled, the squeaking louder, the wheezing breaths more frequent, burying his face again. I realized that the editors had never fully cut out the transition music, just lowered it, so there was a thumping, somber hip-hop beat carrying through the moment, like we were in an old ship's furnace, and the panic and the inevitability were all heightened that much more. "I've got you," the therapist said, which again towed a line between caring, commanding, and threatening. "Come on, let me see your face." Rob obliged, moving the towel, and face exposed, camera creeping even closer, said, "Nothing matters, nothing's going to change." There was one perfect beat extra, and then a cut. Okay, so before I go to the next book, if it's all right, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit in this book and just read like a tiny bit more. We talked about in the Q&A session today, there's the last... Calling them chapters is generous. The last thing in this book kind of explicitly addresses the presidential election that you all may be familiar with that happened far more recently than it feels like, in which a reality star was elected president. And, you know, that kind of changes the stakes or the vibe of writing a book about reality TV and what reality TV does for us. And so I had like a sort of contentious back and forth with my editor about needing to talk about this, and ended up sort of with like my version of like a Trump postscript, I guess. But I think I talked about this a little before. I wanted it to not be like this sort of aggressive political commentary, and wanted to try to more at least express the way that I think these sort of emotions of watching and like being trapped watching feel in this moment in time. So this is just like a little piece from that last end, which again, there's like great pains taken to not like actually address what I'm talking about so much. And again, the you, it's addressed in the sort of the second person addressed to somebody, and that's me sort of talking to my wife and trying to think these things through. "All I have wanted to do lately is look at you. It feels good to do that. Good because I know your face so well, and your body, and how each contorts with a different type of movement or mood, and how that feels like frankness, honesty, since I know it well enough to trust what I'm seeing and its beauty." Solmaz Sharif's incredible poem, Look, begins like this. "It matters what you call a thing." It's a poem about pain and bigotry and terror and the danger of America acting upon the poet's Iranian-American body without looking, or looking at her body without seeing her. She traces the 16 seconds that it might take between a button pressed in Las Vegas and a Hellfire missile hitting Mazar-e-Sharif, how casually and quietly our nation can kill a type of person we've decided to name an enemy. Then she ends with this. Let it matter what we call a thing. Let it be the exquisite face for at least 16 seconds. Let me look at you. Let me look at you in a light that takes years to get here. I had forgotten about the poem until I read it in a coffee shop while trying to write about reality television. I was having a hard time focusing, and I was on Twitter, and I was scrolling and glancing and occasionally reading, and then Gia Tolentino, a writer I really admire, said that this was the poem that kept her sane in these times, and I wanted to be attached to her attempt, her wisdom, so I read the poem. And I was so moved. I am so moved writing this. Tears on my fucking keyboard and all that. Literal tears, no metaphor. Look, I want to. Look. When I see that word repeated, an invitation, a command, I want to be near you so I can look at you. Maybe that's all I'm crying for. Or worse, maybe I'm crying about the idea of myself looking at you, about the absolving power of intimacy, context fading like fog and wind, even as the poem demands that context be unavoidable. I do believe that the personal is always political, and even if I sometimes waver in that belief, I trumpet it loudly enough to my students that I start believing again. After the election, I handed out photocopies of Arendt's On Refugees, Orwell's Why I Write, held them up as cajoling proof of the power and responsibility of a personal story in a dangerous world. Now I hear myself so often in class demanding the acknowledgement that the personal and political must run hand in hand, but usually my students' responses suggest that the political is a burden to their personal narratives, as opposed to an opportunity. The political doesn't deepen what they want to say. It corrals it, it diffuses, or defuses. When my students write about love, they want it to be about just that, on the nose, love, and that should be enough. Or loss, just loss, the only story to tell. Or pain, or rage, or triumph. And sometimes that's frustrating. And I know teachers who consider it their jobs to make students leave class with some diminished sense of his or her own importance in the face of the adult world. But sometimes I think, how can anything feel larger than their own feelings, their own heartbreaks? And in that way, what is intimate, what is entirely theirs to feel, blocks out everything. It's the shadow of an eclipse edging its way across a sun that is every important thing that is happening to and for and with everyone else in the world. All the rest is too bright to look at head on anyway. And I see myself in them, of course. I return to myself and the poem and the command to look, and I think that I am looking. But when I think of the power of looking, there I am looking at you, and then looking at the idea of myself looking at you. The exquisite face for 16 seconds. A light that takes years to get here. It is so much more than two faces pressed close, love-lit, staring. But it's also that. And there is the shadow of an eclipse edging across the sun. Okay. So that's am I okay on time? Can I read a little bit more from another one? I don't know how I'm doing on... Does this feel... Be honest with me. Does this feel like an onerous amount of time? Okay. Thank you. Okay. So, I'm going to read a little bit from Lord Fear, which again, Ruby described like way better than I can. This book also kind of, I think, works in like different modes where there's my memories of my brother, and then there's sort of snippets. I'm not good at this. And there's like, that was the opposite. This is going to be my crowd work component. Wait for it. This is good enough. There's snippets of my own writing, my memories of him, snippets of his writing, and then interviews with other people who knew him, and then that sort of gets synthesized into these scenes. Can you all hear me? Okay. This is picking up sort of later in the book, and it's a scene from the perspective of a woman who's called Seema in the book, who was a Bangladeshi immigrant to New York, who my brother met later in his life, and they had this sort of kind of friendship, but it was hard to tell if it was more than a friendship or not. Like she had a kid and a marriage, and he was a full-blown heroin addict, and they were from sort of very different places, but they had this sort of like important connection with one another, and she was kind enough to talk to me, and so this is apart from her section in which she sort of talked about this idea that he would tell her all the time that he was going to take her to Paris someday because he loved Paris, even though that was not a possibility. And so this kind of picks up with me and her talking after that. Have you been to Paris? She asks me. I tell her I have. The first time I was young, too young to remember much. Josh was there. It was his first time in Paris too, a trip he told her about many times, 6 days of basic tourism. It was me, my mother, my father, and Josh in a little apartment that smelled like jam that my parents had swapped for. I knew you were there, she says. I don't know why I asked you. I knew that. I try to hide how happy it makes me that she knew. It shouldn't be such a big deal. She asks if I remember anything at all from the trip. I do, I say, a little. All I remember is him. I tell her that, and it makes her smile like fingers are pulling her lips back at the edges. She nods, my cue. I remember buying a gargoyle in a gift shop, a monkey man with wings and fangs, bearing those fangs, crouched. I remember Josh doing an impression of a gargoyle. We were sitting on stone steps under a stone building that I only remember as old. He had his leather jacket on, or I made that part up. He was leaning over me, baring his fangs the way gargoyles do it. He was making a hissing noise like a snake, and his lips were stretched so wide that I saw the base of his teeth pushing through his gums. I was laughing. I remember sitting in the apartment, scared of the sound the radiator made when the heat turned on. It was snowing outside, maybe. We were watching the only video available, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, dubbed in French. Josh was pretending to be Jessica Rabbit, slinking around the living room, hands caressing his own neck, lips pouted, eyes nearly closed. Bonjour, he said, and I was laughing. I remember visiting Jim Morrison's grave. I stood back and watched. Josh knelt among the flowers and handmade signs, the poems and rain-warped packs of Marlboros. He was crying. I had no idea who Jim Morrison was, but I liked the visuals, the ancient green trees, the once bright roses lying scattered. When we left, Josh said he wasn't crying out of sadness. He was instead awed by how loved the man had been, how indelible, fresh proof of his worth laid out with each arriving tour bus. Yes, Seema says when I relay that last memory, he was going to take me to the grave. That was very important. He had a poet's soul. I don't cringe at the phrase, though I feel the tug to do so. Poet's soul. On the way back from the grave, Josh put his headphones on me and played Backdoor Man on cassette. I don't tell Seema that part. She is dressed for this occasion. Everything on her is starched, black slacks, white blouse, unbuttoned argyle cardigan. Her hair is pulled into a bun, and I look at her neck, its sloped sides. This is job interview attire, clothing you can't breathe in. I wonder if she works in an office now. I don't ask. She has told me almost nothing about her present, only that she has a daughter, and she looked guilty when she showed me a wallet picture, a kid on class photo day. I can't think of anything else to say about it. A decade has passed since she knew my brother. Most of her life in America has been spent without him, and so much can change for a person who seeks change. Seema is forward momentum personified. I know that even without filling in the blanks. I don't want to think about what she has accomplished since he finally couldn't manage breathing. I have a suspicion that if I prodded her through modesty, I would get to a tale of Employee of the Month plaques, incremental promotions, night school, the kind of resolute working motherhood referred to with folksy admiration at the beginning of politician speeches. But I don't want to ask for the specifics of how she thrived without him. I want to only know what she lost. I ask if she has ever been to Paris because I know she'll say no. That was for us, she says. It's expensive and it takes time. That was a place for him to show me. Paris was his promise to me. Promise is as generous a word as poet. What is a promise that is made without a chance of coming true other than a lie? I will take you. I will be better. We will be together. There is a place, Paris, that is far from here, and lights glow off the river like lanterns floating in the sky. You didn't believe him, did you? I said. There's an undeniable scoff in my voice. I feel cruel. She half smiles without showing her teeth and tilts her face down. I'm sorry, I say. I didn't believe that we would go, she says with quiet emphasis, but I believed in him. I believed that he thought we would. He was not a liar. He was a dreamer. He was an addict. Maybe the difference is just semantic. After talking with Seema, every time I revisit his writing, I will think of her, because no matter what notebook I pick up, as I flip through pages of detox journals and poems and lists of self-affirmations, so many versions of the reasons to get clean heading, I will see the word Paris appear, punctuating his thoughts, a refrain that never ends. Loose leaf, October 1998, Reasons. Because it is harder every time. Get your body back. It's either success or this. Mom is gone. Dad is gone. I can do 3 days. It's just 3 fucking days. A week. I can do a week. Remember, Paris in January. Loose leaf, undated, untitled. What I mean is that I will not lose because I can't. The main thing is that I have an agreement with myself that if I have this methadone, I will succeed. They will be in tandem, my methadone and my inspiration. They will not compete. Accomplished men say, I could not have done this without my wife, etc. Same thing. In 2 months, I will be in Paris at night. 2 months. Paris. I see the word repeated at the end of a sentence. Paris, 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 Paris. Or it's capitalized. Paris, towering over all the words around it. Or it's the last word written for a while, butted up against blank lines, until finally lucidity returns, and he begins again with, "I was gone too long." Coming at the end of sentences, paragraphs, lists, it is often scribbled loosely, and I imagine a hand beginning to let go before the panic or the high, probably the high, swallows all language. Comforting feels like the wrong word, but yes, it's comforting to think of him rushing to write Paris, to put it in pen, unerasable, before the nod takes over, the same way he managed to say it to Seema on the phone before the line went silent. And Paris itself, what he knew of it, was the perfect word to say. A place ideal and far away, just real enough to be a good hypothetical. A place that can exist in collective cultural imagination, free of urban sprawl and supermarkets and traffic congestion, just lights and river, the Eiffel Tower, good bread. A place to love and make art. I like to think that above all, that's what he wanted to do. In college, I traveled to Paris with Sophia, and we watched children push miniature schooners in the pond where everyone watches children do that. I was running out of money, so we bought a single fresh baguette in the mornings, ripped off hunks all day, and as we walked until we were lost, talked about how we needed nothing more than this. It was exactly as those moments in a life were supposed to be, better than the moments around them, indulgent, brief, Facebook logged, and then mostly forgotten. I read Hemingway, of course, and got really into that whole possessive thing. You belong to me, and all of Paris belongs to me, and I belong to this notebook and this pencil. I read James Baldwin's writing too, and loved the swirling emotion, relief, guilt, longing. Quote, "My flight had been dictated by my hope that I could find myself in a place where I would be treated more humanely, where my risks would be more personal, and my fate less austerely sealed. And Paris had done this for me, by leaving me completely alone." End quote. Baldwin showed up in Paris on the run, wanting to be somebody without history. And Paris, its specifics didn't matter, only that Paris was not the place that he was running from. I saw Josh in cafes when I read Baldwin, anonymous to everyone but me, reborn clean. If there was any place for there to remain an ember of him, the promise of his life still pulsing orange, finally free from all back home that had tried to stamp him out, this was it. Of course it was a stretch to find Josh in Baldwin, because Baldwin was running from hatred and oppression, from unavoidable violence crashing in on him. Addiction is a very self-imposed brand of oppression, but still, it's better to think of the addict as oppressed than wallowing. Oppression doesn't carry inward blame, and that has always been the hardest part of remembering, the effort not to blame, the effort to believe that he fought it, even if it was him, and whatever fought it means. To believe that he had the chance to start over, it wouldn't happen again. Belief. I feel that he is alive now, still, Seema tells me. She leans across the table, and her hands almost touch mine. His spirit, I mean, he is watching us. I believe that. I say nothing, so she says, "Maybe I sound cuckoo." It's not a question that I want to answer, because yes, she does. I am not a believer. I was not raised for that. Neither was he, but I think he wanted to believe. In the end, he had to believe. There isn't a language of addiction that takes atheism into account. The NA meetings that Josh quit, the Al-Anon groups that my father later tried to find solace in, both required relinquishing of control to that higher power that wants what is best for us. And really to believe what an addict tells himself, requires a predisposition for, or at least some experience in, faith. All you have seen is deterioration, but you are being promised regeneration, asked to trust that there remains some divinity, and despite how wholly unbelievable that seems, you must believe. There's a reason why Seema was his last friend, the last he made, and then the last to stick around. Why she is the only person I've found who knew him as only an addict. She never got to hear him play music. She never read his words. She never saw the muscle lines that ran like shadows across his torso. She only knew a man afflicted, making promises. Even that first time he spoke to her in Hindi in a sandwich shop on 26th Street, she knew something was wrong. He was waiting to be redeemed, and she never had let herself say that it wouldn't happen. What a sap, I want to think, believing in the unproven and unlikely. No, I hear myself say, not cuckoo at all. Wait, sorry, I'm jumping ahead here. Here we go. There is another Baldwin piece I love, and it has nothing to do with Paris. Sonny's Blues is about a Harlem man with a junkie jazz musician brother. It's about trying to listen. There's a scene where the brother is at the piano, playing, striving to make the narrator understand. Finally, for a moment, he does. Baldwin writes, while the tale of how we suffer and how we are delighted and how we may triumph is never new, it always must be heard. There isn't any other tale to tell. It's the only light we've got in all this darkness. Josh is still speaking to Seema because that's what an addict is always trying to do, trying to tell you. Tonight, in Queens, in an apartment with barred windows and a steep mortgage, where there are no pictures of him, he will speak. Tonight, in a quiet, candlelit bedroom, he will tell her, and she will listen, his voice filling her as she watches her daughter, a smiling child who has never done anything wrong, who likes to dance on the bed in her mother's skirts. Thanks. I don't know if there's. I'm happy to take questions if there's time. Is that? Yeah, whatever works. Or we can go. Honestly, whatever y'all feel comfortable with. I'll be here. Yeah.
Is it ever difficult for you to read back some of the most personal stuff? Some of the stuff that you read, obviously, pretty deep. So do you ever have trouble? Is that ever difficult for you, or are you kind of separated from it at this point?
No, that's an interesting question. It mostly feels kind of separate. The interesting thing was, it's weird when, like, you write a book and it's the only thing that you think about, and then you publish a book and it's the only thing that anybody asks you to talk about for like a week, and then it goes away, and maybe you write another book. And so it actually felt way more intense to read the Lord Fear stuff than it has in a long time, because like I just like haven't read from that book or talked about that book in like 3 years. So that's interesting. Yeah, usually no, but it was weird. It was like I like didn't remember exactly how I had written some of that stuff. So that was interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
When you were reading from Captive Audience, you mentioned the, quote, absolving power of intimacy.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that? Like, just why you would phrase it like that?
Oh, okay, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, that kind of references something earlier in the book. One of the things that I think is interesting about, or one of the things that I was thinking about reality shows and part of the appeal and part of what's so kind of like addicting about them is that you can see, so there's a description at a certain point of, maybe some of you are familiar with this like really iconic Keeping Up with the Kardashians moment where Kim Kardashian loses an earring in the ocean. Yeah, again, and she's like, she like very famously screams like, that was a $75,000 earring, and it's like amazing. But from that, I think one of the things that reality TV does, and this sort of came up in thinking about Trump about that, is that it might feel ridiculous, but you also, it trades entirely in intimate emotion. Like often the screen is quite literally cutting out every context other than the person having the emotion on screen. And then the form of TV compared to other forms, it feels, it's in your house. It feels personal. It's far more involved intimately in your life than many other sort of like forms of culture. And so I think that there's something incredibly appealing, but also kind of dangerous about the fact that when you see somebody screaming or crying or whatever on screen, and you just see one face on that screen, the intimacy begins to make everything else fade, right? And so I guess the argument, if you think about it that way, is that intimacy makes anything else that could be within the context of that intimacy, any other sociological things that you might think about, any other rational things, kind of begin to fade away because there is something incredibly tight on that face emoting at you and you emoting back at that face. And I guess the absolving power of intimacy was sort of referring to the sense that when you feel really, really deeply for one person, it kind of absolves you from thinking about anybody else in that moment. And I think that that's something that's simultaneously beautiful and also dangerous. And so that was something that I was sort of curious about with reality TV. Yeah.
Do you think that creating a memoir is part performance as well as part introspection with creative nonfiction? And if so, why might that be?
That's a good question. I do think so, and I think that Captive Audience, maybe more than anything that I've written, kind of explicitly tries to address that. I think that there's a very weird double bind that both memoirists are discussed in, and that I think also people talk about reality shows in the same way, where either you're like, all I'm getting is you. Either you're like, this is nothing, this is just a person being themselves and I have to be around for it. Or it is a performance and you're like, you're fucking lying to me, you're performing, this isn't authentic. And I think that there's something really interesting about both of those demands being made at the same time. And I think that what's maybe an uncomfortable truth, but an interesting one, is that they kind of have to coexist, right? That like a memoir that was not somebody performing themselves in a way that somebody would want to read would be a horrendous memoir. And that actually we don't necessarily want authenticity. We want something performed well enough to approximate what feels like authenticity. And that is weird and uncomfortable, but various gradations of that I think are true. And that is something that I think is always present and that I'm just interested in. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
So this kind of leads into the question I was thinking about when considering the whole relationship with reality TV, because it seems like there's a proliferation of like social media and how social time face-to-face is going down because we're substituting these platforms. That we are in a way substituting real authentic human relationship and communication with almost performative nature. When you're making a post on Facebook, you're not thinking about talking to somebody, you're thinking about talking to an audience.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering how much of that you're considering when writing the book as well.
I think, I think all of that is there as the backdrop. It's super interesting because when thinking about social media, reality TV feels really quaint, kind of, and in a lot of ways, like reality TV feels like kind of like 90s, early 2000s, like it's kind of long in the tooth now, which I think is, so part of me thinking about reality TV was almost sort of like, why does this still exist? Like, because when you read stuff about early reality TV, all of the anxiety about it was like, everything's going to be like Big Brother, and we're all just going to have to be sharing ourselves all the time, and that's horrific. But it turns out that we are all now very comfortable sharing all of ourselves all the time for free. And so like that kind of apocalypse has already happened, but reality TV still exists and is still popular. So I don't know if this is the answer, but yeah, I do think that all, like the varying levels of what we as generations consider to be authenticity or performance, and how I think we continue to redefine those things in a way that makes us feel better about how we live. I think that's unavoidable and will just sort of continue to be a thing. Yeah.
Hi. So first off, I just want to say that was incredible.
Thanks.
And thanks for reading. And then, okay, so I feel like this is a really cliche question, but whatever.
Go for it.
Was there a moment in your life when you decided that you wanted to be a writer? And like, why did you make that decision?
No, that's a good, I would imagine that's a question that a lot of people in the room are like asking themselves that question. Yeah, that's like a good question. I don't know if there was ever, to be perfectly honest, I'm sure other people in this room have felt that way. Like, in my experience, you kind of keep doing things when people tell you you're good at them. So that's part of it, positive reinforcement. And I'd always liked it and felt okay to. In all honesty, when I got serious about writing, I was in college and like not necessarily a great student early on in college, and I was on the baseball team for a little while and was sort of like really into the vague idea of being somebody who could somehow both be like a baseball player but also like a person who was an English major. And the fact that both of those things existed made me feel better about the fact that I wasn't very good at either. And then I quit baseball and sort of, I was like, what do I want to spend my time thinking about? And honestly, I was just really lucky to have two really great professors in the same semester that I didn't seek out, that I just like happened to take both their classes at the same time. And it was right after I had quit baseball, and I was trying to think about what I want to take seriously. And yeah, that, I just sort of like latched on to what they were talking about. And they happened to be creative writing professors. And then, I think it's less of like a strike of inspiration, although I've heard some people talk about that. It's more just like you keep making decisions until it's harder and harder to back out of them. You know what I mean? So it's like you change yourself into, so it's like, I'm in school and then it's like, I'm going to be an English major. That's a thing. And then it's like, I'm going to try to do creative writing, or I'm going to try to write a creative thesis. And then you say you're going to do it and you have to do it. And then it's like, I'm going to apply to graduate school. And then if you get into graduate school, you kind of got to go. And, really, I mean, I don't mean that glibly. I think there's a lot of small decisions that in my case, it's very, especially with something like doing something creative, I think it's kind of terrifying, and there's all sorts of reasons that logically not to do. So it's only manageable for me anyways to make these like small decisions and then be like, well, now I have to do this. And then, it's like when you learn how to ride a bike and you don't realize that the person's not holding you anymore, right? It's like that, it's that kind of thing. Yeah.
So I write a lot of like short work, and I've always wanted to get more into longer work. How do you hang on to an idea like that, and like for instance reality TV, and really bring that into like a longer piece of work that's quickly? That's
a really good question. I think like we were talking about this earlier. Some folks like I'm not that good at shorter work. I think a lot of it is just holding on to it, right? Like the reality TV thing was really nebulous and vague in my mind when I started writing it, and very well could have been a failure, but I just like kept writing what felt like it wasn't coming together for like 60,000 words. And then it either was going to fail as a book or it was going to succeed as a book. But I think it's really hard to know if you've got something until there's a lot there and you sort of like shake your head and are like, oh, I'm going to go back and read this. And so I think the only way to think about doing something longer is